What is the difference between outputs, outcomes, and impacts when it comes to grant writing and grant reporting? I'm Benjamin Dean from grantgetting.com. We're going to talk about this, break this down with some examples in this video. I hope you enjoy it. This, like others on this channel, are aimed at helping you get more grants. There's a link in the description with some additional resources and tips relating to this topic. Okay, so number one, this is all coming typically from something called a logic model. A logic model is a tool that grant writers and program designers and program managers use in order to map out their intervention in an environment, moving from what the situation is or what the problem is through to the resources that they have to put into the situation, the activities or the intervention. Then comes outputs, outcomes, and sometimes we call the downstream effects impacts. Okay, this is the basis of the logic model. So this is something that has sort of ebbed and flowed so far as I can tell in terms of being a grant deliverable. It's not very common to find it as a required document, but the understanding of these three terms and whether they are called these three terms specifically is actually irrelevant. They may be called other things. We are going to use these because these are the most commonly used terms. That's the important part, is understanding the differences between them. So we'll start with outputs. Outputs are the things that happen as a direct result of the services that you offer in your project activities or your program activities. They are tangible. They are not intangible. More importantly than them being tangible is them being not intangible. I know that's the same thing, but they need to be measurable. They are results. You can easily count them. I always think about them as these are the counting numbers. You can report these things with almost no additional work, hopefully. If you are producing services, doing services in the community, there is some unit of measurement by which you are counting what you're doing. Whatever that unit of measurement is, that is essentially an output. If you're running for example, you're running a literacy program, the outputs might be the number of books that you have handed out or the number of workshops, educational workshops that you've conducted. Outputs are essential because they show what your project is producing on a day-to-day or week-to-week or event-by-event basis. They are the baseline, okay? Everybody has outputs. And these outputs can be extrapolated upon. They can be, what's the word? Not divided, but it's more like you can count a bunch of different stuff. There's a lot of opportunities to have a lot of different outputs in your services that you provide. Okay, but they don't tell the whole story. Where grant giving is shifting is further downstream. Okay, the further downstream you go, if you imagine this as a stream, the head of the stream is the stuff you're doing, and downstream would be outputs, outcomes, and impacts. Impacts being further downstream. The trend is to go further downstream. Now, what that requires of program managers and grant writers is to have good data collection processes in place. And that's a whole nother topic, but that's really one of the main differences between these, is that outputs don't require too much data collection sophistication. It's just counting, right? You don't need big surveys to do this. You need this data as a baseline. You need it as, some might say a KPI. It's an indicator of growth, or it's an indicator of progress. All right. Or, in some degrees, how you're performing as an organization. But it most certainly doesn't tell the whole story. And when it comes to grant writing, it is completely incomplete. All right. So that's an output. The next sort of phase of, things that are happening because of your activities or because of the outputs, if you will, would be outcomes. And these are the changes. All right. So an output isn't really a change. It's just something that happened. An outcome is a change, meaning that someone or some group of people or something, some environment started in one place and they ended in another place. Okay. They are what results from your project's activities. Unlike outputs, which are mostly about what you do, outcomes are about what happens because of what you do. They are the effects on the target market or the target population or the target environment. Okay. For example, in the literacy program, an outcome might be the percentage of participants who improve their reading skills, and the number of students who advance to the next grade level, the percentage of students or the increase in the percentage of students that advance to the next grade level. Okay, outcomes are critical because they demonstrate the value and effectiveness of your project, or at least they begin to. They are the primary mechanism, really, to evaluate effectiveness, right? Anybody can go out there and hand out pamphlets, right? That doesn't do anything necessarily, right? It doesn't do anything to offer services. It doesn't do anything to even serve someone necessarily. What does something is the change in behavior. And I'll actually start with the change in knowledge, the change in behavior, and the change in environment or the change in conditions. Now, outcomes, what we're talking about here, point two, output, outcomes. Outcomes are most traditionally or commonly, I guess, associated with changes in knowledge and changes in behavior, otherwise known as actions. Okay, so a change in knowledge will be just that, a change in an awareness, a change in an understanding, increased knowledge, increased awareness, increased access. You now know more. Somebody knows more, or they know something differently. They know how to do something. They know how to access something. They know what something is. They know where to find resources. Things like that. There's a change mentally. A change in behavior is an action, which is something that happened differently because of the intervention and the outputs that you are putting forth. Okay, now we're going to go to number three, which is impacts. Impacts are typically looking at groups, not necessarily looking at individuals. And again, not all these rules apply everywhere. There's no standard code, right? But this is generally what grantors and the grant writing, sort of world means. So impacts are longer term, and they're typically involving groups. So this would be a change, typically a change in condition, a change in the environment. Okay, it is on a community level or maybe a society level. These are so much more challenging to, I guess, measure, if we want to call it measurement, because they occur over a longer period of time and they're influenced by so many other factors. For example, the impact of the literacy program could be an increase in overall literacy rate in the community, or a reduction in poverty as more people gain better jobs because of improved literacy. Those are all logical conclusions that could happen. And absolutely, when you draft your logic model, it's logic, right? So the things that tie things together is logic. So if you have logic to tie things together, to thread them together for your impacts, then you want to do that. It is then a managerial sort of strategic decision on how you want to measure that. Most small nonprofits don't touch the measurement of impacts. They should and do measure the change in knowledge and change in behavior. But most, not all, but most smaller to mid-sized nonprofits use research or use, the logic to say, because of these activities, because of these outputs, and because of these outcomes, we will see these changes in the community. Now, if a nonprofit or, communities have been around long enough and they're able to actually pull in third-party data from their intervention date some years ago through to today, and they're somehow able to control for all the varying external factors, which might be a control group in different areas of the country or areas of the world, then you might be able to get to some firsthand or sort of compilation of impact data. But for the most part, impacts are something that most nonprofits are tying together. Okay. They are vital, and they are truly why many nonprofits are in business, because they want to make a change in the world, a change in the community, but not always so easy to measure that. So I'm going to go through a few more, I guess, two more examples here of these. One is a youth mentorship program. So outputs would be the number of mentoring sessions conducted, such as 50 weekly mentoring sessions held over 6 months. Another output would be the number of youth participants, 30 at-risk youth enrolled in the program. Okay, those are outputs. Those are counting numbers. Outcomes would be improved academic performance among the participants, increased self-confidence in the youth. Those are things that can be measured, but would only be able to be measured if they were measured before the intervention and after the intervention. Okay, so this is why I'm saying that these tools are program design tools, not just grant writing tools. Okay, so these things need to talk together. Those are outcomes. Impacts would be long-term reduction in school dropout rates in the community, or greater community engagement among youth. So that could be addressed as participants were more likely to engage in local leadership roles or in community service. Okay, again, something that can be measured potentially, but is something that will happen over a period of time, not necessarily over a 6 or 12 or 18-month period. Okay, that's example one. Example two, we'll do food security program for low-income families. Outputs for this would be number of food boxes distributed, as well as number of families served. We distributed 2,000 food boxes to 500 families over the course of this grant period. Those are counting numbers. An outcome would be improved access to nutritional food, improved knowledge of nutrition and meal planning. Those could be reported, such as 80% of families reported increased access to 3 meals a day. 70% demonstrated increased knowledge of meal planning, right? Again, you're doing surveys, you're doing some sort of data collection at the beginning, perhaps in the middle, and perhaps and likely at the end to show that change in behavior. The impact would be something like long-term reduction in food security or healthier lifestyles among families. Okay, so healthier lifestyles, that is such a big idea, but the example would be families served reported fewer instances of diet-related health issues, such as diabetes and obesity, over a 3-year period, right? So that is something you could measure for sure, but would be something that would take more than just the 12-month grant period, right? Which is when we're talking about grant writing and grant reporting, you're likely not going to be able to report on those in your final grant report. Okay, that is my description there. Hopefully this is helpful. There is a link in the description with some additional information. If you have questions about this topic, outputs, outcomes, impacts, pop them in the comments below, and I would love to respond. So thank you for jumping in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.